forgot to adjust the mic because I'm way too tall. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brett Cannon. I will explain where I work in a second, but this talk is about setting expectations for open source participation. I'm going to preface all this with the fact that I'm going to try not to swear too much, but don't be shocked if it slips out a little bit, so I don't mean to offend anyone. But I can get a little passionate about this topic because it dredges up some bad memories on occasion, and so that can lead to some bad language. So you've all been warned. So to give you some background as to why I'm giving this talk, just want to tell you a little bit who I am. So first of all, the majority of my day job now is as development lead for the Python extension for Visual Studio Code. It's actually kind of an interesting project. It was originally a side project by Don Giamatti out of Australia for VS Code to add Python support. Became the #1 most popular extension, and it's now the #2 most popular because people really love Chrome debugging. And what's interesting about it is we actually hired Don full-time in September, and we've now actually brought the extension into Microsoft as still an open source project, but actually a corporate-funded open source project, because Don now gets paid to work on it full-time, I now get paid to work on it full-time. And so this is what I would call an instance of enterprise open source, where there's a company behind it that funds it, but it's still open fully to the community to actually take in contributions. Now, on top of that, I'm lucky enough to have Microsoft pay me to work 20% time to Python, the actual language. I've actually been a core developer of Python for 14 years now. I believe Python's one of the largest open source projects out there at this point, 7 million users, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I call that a community-based open source project because there's no real corporate entity that funds or backs Python like other projects do. So this isn't like Facebook with React or Google with Go, where there's a team funded by a single company that really, at least initially, drives it and kind of help bring up the core and kind of will make sure it's always there. Basically, if all the volunteers on Python quit, Python would go away. And then lastly, I contribute a lot. A lot of this admittedly are doc changes, but I've contributed to over 80 projects now. So I've gotten to see a lot of different development processes and participated to various levels in other open source groups and communities. So I pretty much cover the gamut at this point of what it's like to work in open source. So I have kind of so I'd like to think a unique perspective on all this. Now, having said I have a unique perspective, we should probably define exactly what we're talking about here. So what exactly is open source for in terms of project and a community? Well, basically, I view it as two things. It's collaborating in the maintenance of some software and honestly trying to have fun. It's always a balance of these two, though. You never want just one or the other. If everyone's just having fun, basically nothing's going to get done, which might be great, but kind of if we're trying to keep some software running, it's kind of important. But then again, if you're just doing software and it ain't fun, you're not going to want to do it. And because open source is typically driven a lot by volunteers, this can be really critical because if you hate working on your software because it's not fun, you're not going to want to do it. And so in order to really keep a vibrant community and project going, you have to balance these two out. Now, I should mention that free software is a little different here because free software is kind of a social justice movement about software always being open and free, so it's a little different here. Just to be very clear. Now, how do you sustain an open source project? Well, it's kind of obvious when you really think about it. You basically need to attract new people, and you need to retain old people, or current people. You need to attract new people because current developers and participants in the community basically slowly go away, right? It can be for various things. You may have been working in this open source community because your job said you needed to. You might just lose interest over time. We've unfortunately have people just pass away. So you basically have to make sure that you bring in new people to replace the people who go away. And hopefully, honestly, grow faster than replacement speed so that the community can actually grow. But you don't want to just do that at the cost of not retaining your current people because there's a lot of inherent knowledge in the people who've been in the community on how things are done, right? Like the feel of the community, how the software works, et cetera. Because if you're just constantly having people drop off and just bringing in new people, you'll have complete stop energy because everyone's going to be spending all their time getting ramped up on the new process. So it's a balancing act. So what all this really means basically is we need to work together to set reasonable expectations on how to make open source enjoyable for everyone. And this is really key because you kind of have to remember For most open source, everyone is either a volunteer or being paid by someone that isn't you to make it work. And so that means there's a certain symbiotic relationship here of how we have to make sure that what you might need and the community overall needs from some open source meshes with what the people who are volunteering or getting paid to do work together so that everyone kind of is basically happy with the outcome. Because if you don't keep this in mind, you're going to have this real skew of views of people who are participating in using the software and the people who are actually maintaining it. And if they get out of alignment, you can have real issues in the community and with the project. And this can lead to burnout and various other problems. So we unfortunately don't always do a great job with this. So about a year ago, Corey Benfield did this tweet where he said, quote, here's a bit of real talk for people. I think working in OSS has made me more bitter and short-tempered, end quote. Unfortunately, this is not abnormal. So in Corey's case, if you've ever met Corey, nice guy based out of London, UK. He's the co-maintainer of requests. I believe he's now the lead maintainer of URLib 3. He's the developer of HTTP H2, Hyper H2, sorry. So Corey plays a fairly critical role in our community for networking. And unfortunately, that role has made him somewhat more bitter and short-tempered. The other problem is Corey has a partner. And if his wife came to him and said, I don't like what open source has done to you, you need to choose between open source and me, I hope to God he chooses her. But if he does, that also means we suddenly lost Corey. So the point is, the fact that we've ended up in this position where Corey has had his personality turned to being short-tempered and bitter has a real cost to us as a community, because it means if he falls off the earth and decides, I'm walking away from Python, suddenly a very key project in URLib 3 no longer has a key maintainer, Requests has lost a major maintainer, our H2 support in Python suddenly lost its maintainer. I mean, it's a big deal. For me personally, I actually take a month off now from open source once a year to reset myself, because 2016, October 2016, I was really close to burnout. And so I actually had to take a full month off to reset myself and really ground myself and truly think about what I wanted to do with Python. And that's after 13 years of contribution. So, I mean, it was really significant for me to actually step away for a full month and not spend any personal time on the project at all. I also have a rule in my house where I'm not allowed to do any open source one day every weekend, so that my weekends are not ruined by open source. I'll talk about examples in a minute, but I've had multiple times where my wife has gone, what's wrong? And I have to say, I read an email from open source today, and she goes, oh. And I know it's funny, but it really sucks when it starts to impact your family. And so it's something we all really need to be aware of, that this is happening and what we can all do to kind of stop this from happening, because if everyone starts to burn out, and this was really endemic in about last year and the year previous, there was a huge swath of people burning out and quitting, because it's basically people going, oh wow, you know what, I can just walk away. And it just cascaded across several projects. So it's something we definitely need to be aware of. Luckily, taking my month off and my one day a weekend seems to be working well for me, but not everyone does that, and we just really need to keep an eye on all this. I think one of the key things here that happens that leads to this happening, and some of these bad interactions that occur online with open source, is basically revolves around two key things. One is there is a cost to open source that we don't always really think of. I mean, obviously there's open source is great because it's free, right? That's the business case that's really awesome that people really love. But behind it all, the stuff that actually produces this open source has a cost, right? There's people's time, there's people's effort, and people's emotional output. And we can all contemplate and understand the concept of the amount of time and effort, right? Like if I take out an hour or two on the weekend to look at a patch and get it accepted, we all understand that. But there's also an amount of emotional output from me and the contributor where we're actually putting ourselves out there, right? Like there's potential criticism, having a discussion, interacting, right? It's a really tough, it can be a really tough emotional thing to deal with. And if things get out of whack and then there becomes emotional abuse in the interaction, it's really draining and hard to deal with, right? Like there's a general saying that it takes 10 positives to overdo a negative. So it can take one really negative comment from someone who who's just upset for some odd reason over something, and then it takes forever to get the positive reinforcement back to overwrite that one negative aspect, right? I mean, this is why I have to take one day off every weekend to guarantee that if I have a negative thing happen on a Saturday, my Sunday is not completely ruined because I looked at something else, or I have a day to actually calm down and go, like, it's okay, that person was maybe having a bad day, ignore the really nasty comment, it's not a big deal, but it takes a lot of time and effort. The other thing that people don't always necessarily realize is open source is a series of unsolicited favors. And I really want to harp on this because it really helps put things in perspective, I find, when you realize that it's a bunch of favors that you didn't necessarily ask for, right? Like, and that's fantastic. It's a really amazing idea that people come together and just choose to, without asking, come forward and help out on a project, right? Like, you might submit a pull request to Python, and that is absolutely awesome. I never asked you to, and you chose to do it, and that's fantastic. And what can happen, though, is because I didn't ask for it, and if I say thanks but no thanks, people really get hurt. And understandably, I mean, you put a lot of effort into it, and you want to see it get in or something, but you have to realize when something's not asked for, you have to be ready for someone to say thank you but no thank you. Because it's still, you're doing a favor, right? It's not necessarily something that was requested and you're saying, no, I changed my mind. It's a very subtle line here, but the key thing is when you do someone a favor, it's okay if they don't accept it. They're supposed to still be thankful that you tried to do the favor for them, but I mean, as we all know, if you offer to do a favor for someone, and they say no, it's okay, as long as they're gracious about it. But some people do not take it this way at all. Like, they forget the whole favor aspect of this and view it as, I did this for you, you owe me something. And if you don't take it like that, they can really have a bad reaction. So, as I said in the subtitle, it's like giving people gifts that you didn't necessarily ask for. And actually, I'm going to use a bunch of scenarios around the idea of going to family holidays for around Christmas time to kind of help get the point across, because I'm sure we've all had wonderful interactions at home around Christmas, so we'll hopefully get the point across. Because much like open source, we're all trying to find that magical symbiotic relationship with our family, even when they're not exactly acting the way we wish they would. So, giving out and using open source, right? So, let's say you're going over to the family gathering for Christmas, and your crazy uncle's got some pamphlets out denying climate change. Okay, so you're gonna roll your eyes and go, okay, fine. He's the climate denier, whatever. But the pamphlets are sitting on the side. You can choose to ignore them. You can say something if you want, but the key point is usually the worst thing is if there's some open source you really don't like, you can just choose to ignore it. Don't use it, whatever, no big deal, right? So luckily, in that aspect of all these kinds of scenarios where there's some open source you don't care for, you can just leave it, right? You don't have to say anything, you just choose not to use it, not a big deal. Where stuff starts to become a little toxic is providing feedback. So this can be when a relative decides to tell you flat out that you're stupid. Hopefully you don't have much family that says that to anyone in this room. But I have been called stupid, flat out, online. I've had Python, something I've dedicated 14 years of my life, and I can't even count the number of hours, flat out called stupid. And it hurts. I mean, fully admit, it really hits you in the gut, because this is something I've dedicated 14 years of my life to, and I voluntarily have put 14 years of my life into, right? This is not work time where I'm getting paid something. This is because I choose to participate in this wonderful community of ours, and occasionally there's that one person who decides to come out and say, you know what, Python's really stupid because of blank, blank, and blank. And you know what, sometimes that blank is specifically something I did, right? Is something, that pip I wrote that I implemented and I got in the language. And so they're basically calling me stupid. And it really sucks. And so this is one of those cases where people don't stop and really think about what they're saying. I mean, it's one thing to say, like, you know, I don't understand why Python did this, right? Because, I mean, Python's 26 years old. There are mistakes in the language. I will fully admit I've made some of the mistakes in the language at this point. But people don't stop to think about how to phrase things so it's not so much of a gut punch to the people who actually make this all happen on any project, right? So something to keep in mind when you do participate online and you find something you don't like, just say, you know, I don't understand why this is it. Why this is? It doesn't make sense. It's fine to just question it, like going, I really just don't understand, and that's fine. But saying flat out, it's stupid just because you don't understand why it is, that's going a bit far. Submitting contributions. This is where it can go kind of toxic the other direction from maintainer out. So, and this gets really tricky because you can almost view this as when someone gives you a pull request, it can sometimes be like someone trying to give you a puppy that you never asked for. And this might sound a little extreme, but just go with it. Imagine someone literally gave you a puppy for Christmas that you didn't really ask for, right? If you accept that puppy, you're accepting that puppy for like 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, right? You're gonna have to train it. You're gonna have to give it a shot. You gotta keep it going, keep it healthy, everything. Now you might love this puppy, so that's great, but you still have to realize you're gonna have to keep this puppy around for a long time. Same thing with open source. And I know it's a weird analogy here, but realize Python's 26 years old, right? I've personally been involved with it for 14 years. I have code in there that is still in there that I still take care of, right? So accepting a pull request, for instance, basically means I have decided I am personally more or less willing, or at least committing the Python development team to maintaining it for decades. I mean, it's a really weird scale to think about, but that's basically what happens whenever we accept a pull request, which means sometimes we have to say like, thank you, but no thank you. Because once again, as I said, lots of unsolicited favors, more or less. People give us like pull requests and feedback and stuff. Sometimes we just have to go like, we appreciate what you did, but we just aren't comfortable accepting this. And sometimes people are, okay, great, I understand. And some people just do not get it. And they just get so upset because they feel like we're insulting them. I hope every maintainer tries to be very gracious when they say no. Because if you say, no, that's ridiculous, that's not good, that's really bad on the maintainer, right? Because once again, you don't want to tell anyone that the hard time and effort they put in to try to learn Python and its internals and to give in and contribute was wasted. You want them to like, okay, I understand, thank you, but no, and hopefully you learned something while you did it, but try to be gracious about it. But this is one of these things where some people just don't understand the way this interaction could go bad. Because, as I said, I have to think in terms of decades here for any one line change. And I mean, it's weird to have to worry about that kind of stuff. Feedback is kind of like feedback on open source. It's really tricky to make sure people don't feel insulted because pull requests and the code review you typically follow can typically edge on brevity. And if you're too brief, you don't get the point across that you're being appreciative and you're just trying to help the person get to the code so that it can be accepted. Because once again, if I accept your pull request, I'm basically committing a whole group of people to maintaining it for 10, 20 years. And if you don't phrase it properly, you can come off as very, I mean, we've all gotten code reviews. We know what it's like. Sometimes they're great and people are very friendly about it. It's like, you know, I think it could maybe be done better this way, or could you possibly explain why this is versus change that, that's wrong, do that, go fix it, right? There are various ways to actually approach and to participate with this. And it should go both ways, right? It's the maintainer being very gracious and understanding, just trying to say, you know what, I'm not saying your ideas are bad, it's just we need to potentially change some of this just so that we can get it in. And the same with the contributor going like, okay, I understand, it's not perfect, and I'm okay with making changes because I'm not perfect either. So everyone basically admitting everyone can do something wrong and it's not a big deal. And then maintaining. As they say in the bottom, it's kind of like arguing with your siblings over how to load the dishwasher. Working with other maintainers you think would be pretty good, and it can be, but it can also get kind of toxic on occasion too, because people don't stop and really think about what the heck they're arguing over, because who really cares about the name of that stupid variable? But it happens, right? Like I've seen huge threads huge threads leading to arguments over some of the silliest things in Python dev, because some people just get very passionate about this, which is understandable. I mean, for instance, as I said, 14 years, I care a lot about Python, obviously, so we all take things kind of far on occasion. But like, I have literally come this close to being in tears over an argument with some people in Python, because they just got so over the top that they basically started to lash out at me personally. I mean, it gets really rough sometimes on some projects. Now, luckily that was, oh God, was that a decade ago maybe? So, I mean, luckily it's not a regular occurrence, thank God, so I don't think the Python development team is really toxic or anything like that. But the point is everyone's got their off days and it can get really heated. And it's one of these things where we all need to take time to step back, really think, and go like, okay, do I really need to write this email this way? Do I really need to phrase it that way? Is that really the way I want to go? I mean, thank God, I mean, you would think, thank goodness this is all over email or something, so we have time to stop and think about what we just wrote before we click that send button. But unfortunately, a lot of us, don't, and me included on occasion, don't stop to actually take that actual opportunity to actually think about what we're about to say. And I do realize some of this sounds a little biased towards maintainers, but honestly, it's because it is. On scale alone, unfortunately, maintainers tend to get the real brunt of all this because, I mean, there are 7 million Python users, so there are 7 million potential people out there who are going to say thank you to me or call me an idiot. Luckily, thank goodness this community is awesome, and the majority of the time it's thank you, or honestly nothing at all, but that's fine. But as I said earlier, it's that kind of 10 to 1 of one negative takes 10 positives to overwrite that one negative, and it can be a little tough to deal with. And it's one of those things where it's, if you try to participate in an open source project and you don't have a great experience off the bat, you can probably walk away okay because you haven't really gotten too involved yet. I'm 14 years in, it's a little harder to just walk away. I'd rather not have to. Thank goodness I don't think I will, but it is something to just be aware of why it might kind of seem a little biased. As I said, I think the really key thing here is realizing everyone's just trying to do favors for each other. I'm trying to help everyone out there help make Python the best it can be and help make the community as awesome as it can be, just like you're trying to help by coming in and contributing to help keep the code working. And everyone just has to realize it's all favors that we didn't necessarily ask for, and everyone just needs to really be gracious about it. Honest, and to be really frank, the PSF Code of Conduct pretty much covers this, right? Be open, be considerate, be respectful. That's really all this takes to really make this not be a huge issue. If we all really just stop and think before we click send anything in text anywhere, because the internet's in ink, it doesn't get erased, is just basically think about the PSF Code of Conduct. And just as long as we think about that, everything's fine. It'd be great. If you need a rule of thumb of how to handle this, my wife's in HR, so I kind of think in terms of HR guidelines sometimes. So basically, before you write something, you click the send button, a couple things you should think about. First, assume and realize you're basically probably going to be asking me to do you a favor. So if you're thinking you're asking too much or you're not asking in a way you think someone would be willing to do a favor for you, maybe you should rephrase what you're about to ask and make it so that you realize you're asking a favor. Another thing is assume your boss is going to read what you're about to say. If that fails, assume my family is going to read what you say. And if that fails, assume your family is going to read what you say. Because I assume pretty much everyone in this room either cares about what their boss says so they don't get fired, what my family says so that you're not embarrassed in public, or what your family says because you care about what your mom and dad think about you. So just really just stop and think about how you're phrasing things and what you're going to say to people. Because honestly, we all pay for open source with kindness, right? This is how we keep this going. This is why this community is considered amazing and one of the best open source communities in existence, honestly. Because generally we're all realize that Python is run on kindness, and that's what we should perpetuate. And it's just making sure that we all do that every day whenever we interact with the community and that we keep that going forward. And with that, I'm open to questions. Thank you. And I didn't swear, yes.
Hello. Is there anything you think the community could do to help people be more civilized to each other? I guess the two ideas that, I'll let you answer the question, then I'll tell you my 2 cents too.
So this is my personal opinion. I'm sure there are people in this community who disagree with me on this one. I think we're a little overly accepting of letting people blow off steam online. I think we're a little too worried about upsetting people. So I've seen cases over my years where people have come out and been fairly aggressive or mean to people. And I know that the old standard of don't feed the troll is good. You don't want to get in an argument, but I also think it's totally fine to say, you know what? I don't think you're necessarily meant to be mean to me, and maybe you're having a bad, you don't have to say they're having a bad day, but just assume they are, and just go like, I don't think you meant to come off as being mean, but you really did because you phrased it this way. So I just want to make sure you realize that that's how it came off. Because sometimes it's cultural, right? Sometimes it's literally just the culture they come from, the way they phrase it is totally acceptable, and from a Canadian perspective, it comes off as being rude. And I mean, we're like that as Canadians. And that's fine, but that's the key point, right? Is if you just always give people the benefit of the doubt, you can point out that fact and go, okay, hey, I don't think that's necessarily nice. And sometimes, honestly, some people actually need someone else to do that, because if you're new to the community, you might not feel you're in a position to actually step forward and tell someone like, hey, you know what? I appreciate what you're trying to say, but the way you said it really, it upset me. So I'd appreciate it if you just maybe, I think this is why, so maybe you just might want to watch how you phrase things. And I think that would help a lot, because we, historically in this community, just try to not upset people by pointing that out, and I think we could probably stand to do it a little bit more.
Do you think meeting other people in person helps people treat each other better, or you're not sure one way or the other?
I honestly don't know. I'd hope so. I mean, most of the people, I know people who I know online that I've met in person who are very friendly and nice in person, and they're just very abrupt online. And so that at least has helped me understand that that's the way they communicate, because it's turned out to be a cultural thing. So in that aspect, yes. I don't think it's ever led to anyone changing how they are as a person. So like if they're just perpetually mean, I've not come across where I've met someone, introduced myself in person, and they've suddenly gotten nice about it. Usually it's happened, usually that kind of change I've seen is because I've confronted them and said like, hey, just so you know, the way you phrased this really came off as kind of insulting. I don't think you meant that, but because you said it this way, it came off to me as that, so just be aware. And then you go, oh, okay, sorry, new to this, didn't know, and they learn and they change, and that's great. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they then go into my black hole filter on my email, which I don't always love doing, because I'd rather get the person to change so that other people don't have to necessarily suffer through the same thing. But I am only one person, and I only control so many mailing lists. So yeah, I don't really know. I just don't know. I don't have enough anecdotal evidence to be able to answer that.
Okay. I had another thought, which is, I wonder if there's a way to like make pull requests less personally confrontational by like having them either submitted by a committee or adjudicated by a committee. Do you think it's worth the extra sort of organizational bandwidth that might introduce?
No, because I don't think it's that level of chronic yet. I mean, it's definitely an issue that pops up regularly, but I think it's more of just making sure everyone is. I mean, one of the reasons I've started giving this talk is I wanted to get to the point where when this happens, people can provide a link to my 15-minute version of this talk from JupyterCon, or which is on YouTube, or this one, or any future one I give, and Bill's like, look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but maybe you want to watch this video, and that'll explain it, or whatever, or some document or something, because the problem is we already have, it's hard enough just trying to keep the project running, just because of the amount of input coming in versus the number of people who are there to review to make output going out, that if we went to a committee status, that basically Python would grind to a halt. Now, that might work for other projects that don't have that bandwidth issue, but I know at least for us, I just don't think that's going to be tenable. So I think it's more of just getting the message across early with people, and so that they know perpetually going forward that just realize that you might instinctively want to phrase things this way, but maybe it's better to phrase things another way. Yes?
Hi, thank you. I never thought I would say this to somebody working for Microsoft, but I want to invite you a beer. But apart from that, how do you deal, because I mean, I work in Matplotlib, so it's a lot smaller scale, but we have the same issues.
Yeah, I've talked to Thomas actually about this stuff.
How do you deal with, okay, I'm writing the response, no, wait back a little bit, but if you stay there, you will stay there forever, thinking back on what you're going to say. How do you deal with, okay, this is enough, I think I turned the idea that I want to say enough around, because no, your contribution is not good enough, or forget it. I mean,
so obviously it's going to be very personal for each person. So for me, I've been doing this for 14 years. So I've just developed my own technique in dealing with it, and I'm lucky enough to have my bachelor's is actually in philosophy, so I've learned how to write diplomatically, as it were. So I've just slowly developed that skill set. And so the way I do it personally is I write something, I read it through one more time, I make sure nothing comes off as accusatory or directed at a person. I try to phrase it all as I think, or asking a question, or something like that. This is actually a technique I learned from Yarko, for any of those of you who know Yarko from our community. That basically, as long as you make sure it's not at someone, it's either you're asking them or you're just saying this is me, this is my thing, not you, your thing that's led to this. It tends to go over a lot better. And so that's basically what I do. I just go through and just make sure, okay, does anything come off as accusatory, yes or no? If it's yes, then I rephrase it, as I said, as if I say I'm thinking something or asking a question so it's not as direct. And then checking for grammar and spelling mistakes. So I usually go over it once, maybe twice. More or less, once I hit a steady state, I try to stop. Because I'm not one of these people who constantly rephrases over and over and over again and spend an hour, unless it's like really touchy. But basically, it's usually once or twice I just go over and just, yeah, as I said, just make sure it's not just very much like, do you really, do we think that? Is there maybe this? Or like, I think, I mean, it's almost like how you would think someone would want you to talk in therapy, right? Because, I mean, that's basically what you're trying to disarm the situation. So it's just very much making sure it's not, pointing into the stick at the person. If that makes sense. Yes?
Hi. It's not a criticism of Microsoft at all, but it's just, I don't know, I just want to say, like, I want to ask, what if, like, how does the community should deal with corporate takeover of, like, open source projects? Like, in this particular case of this plugin,
Yeah.
it worked fine because it's Microsoft who took care of it and everything.
Yeah.
But what if instead it was a random startup who hired the contributors and then they plug in their like analytics in it? And
Oh, you're
it's
talking about
really
the
dirty.
kite situation?
And like the main solution that people have found is like, well, just fork it. It's open source, but it's very difficult to get traction for those forks on very popular projects. So how should we approach this problem?
Well, I mean, luckily I haven't seen that happen very often. I mean, in this specific instance, Don came along with the project and was totally happy to do it because he realized that there was a messaging with the extension to go like, look, this is a supported thing. Is open source, it stayed open source. In our case, we specifically forked Don's repo on GitHub, so it actually says it's a fork of Don's repo. In other cases, it's basically if the original creator decided to do that, I mean, that's his decision, right? It was his choice. He's the one that was leading it. He's the one that put his time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into it, and that's the decision you want to go, so that's great. I understand that forking doesn't gain the traction, but I don't view open source as a popularity contest, right? Now, for instance, I started on Python way back. I started using Python in 2000, and I became a core contributor in 2003. This is before Python hockey stick. This is back when I was in grad school, and when I said I actually work on Python, people went, oh, is that the white space language, right? So I've been doing this well before Python became this big behemoth of a thing that I can now just say, oh, okay, cool. So I just personally have never worried about that forking problem because I don't view this as a competition of who's the most popular web framework or something. It's a thing where if it works, it's great, and if it doesn't, then honestly you either have to pay someone or you got to write your own software. And you just do the best you can. So it's just not worth getting angry over. It's worth going, okay, I don't like the direction the project's gone, so I'm going to work with the people and fork it, or I'll just do my own thing or what have you. Because as I said, it's as soon as you start getting mad and accusatory about all this stuff, it's just not worth it. It's just software in the end of the day.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? All right, well, I'm very tall, so you can find me around the conference if anything comes up.